I was watching you like yell at everybody and ring the bell for a long time, and I thought, it'd be good if you had a microphone. And then I realised I've got one. So welcome back, ladies and gentlemen. It's been a great start to the day, and today the greatness continues with our Pacific panel. They will attempt to define what they think the reset will be and what it will mean for the way NGOs, businesses and governments work in the Pacific. Peter Whaafiu will facilitate the panel. He's the chair of Pacific Media Networks and Amnesty International. We've got Penele Fale, an award-winning climate change analyst and director of Lear International. We've got Karen Rangi, director of the Cook Islands Investment Corporation. Karen was made an Officer of New Zealand Order of Merit in this year's Queen's Birthday Honours for services to Pacific communities. We've got Kiki Moate, the head of Pacifica Medical Association and much loved son of the Cook Islands, and the actual son of the former Prime Minister of the Cook Islands. But still love everybody. And we have Josiah Tuolamali'i, the future Prime Minister of New Zealand, and but currently the chair of Pacific Youth and Transformation Council. So how are you guys all feeling?
Awesome.
Good answer. Okay, so take it away, Peter.
Okay, Whakataite Lava. Josh, can you hear me up the back? Excellent. So, a couple of great speeches by two Deputy Prime Ministers, their panellists. I guess the first question I think everybody's sort of asking, and those who are sort of new to this, is what is the Pacific Reset? So, it'd be great to sort of get your definition for, from your perspective and given your various hats. So, eni, meni, mani, mo. Kiki, can I start with you, beloved son of the Cook Islands? What is the Pacific Reset to you?
Absolutely. Switch the PowerPoint off and wait 1 minute and restart again. So, two main fronts. The first biggest component I see for the reset is the New Zealand arm. So the reset is about New Zealand Inc. looking at what we've been doing for the last 20, 30, 40, 50 years, the psyche of our people within New Zealand, the demographics of our people in New Zealand, and also the maturity of our people in New Zealand. Now, maturity is probably the most important part because we have a mature Deputy Prime Minister in New Zealand. Why is it taking this long for the Deputy Prime Minister, to actually reset the whole program? So there is a maturity in the system. There's maturity in our parliamentary process. We now have increasing proportional representation of Pacific people at the high levels of office. We have maturity of our people in the sectors, education, health, social welfare, that are delivering for New Zealand, but also call Pacific countries their homes. And there's a maturity that we look at, that I look at in New Zealand, where the concept of remittance that was mentioned years ago of our populations coming to New Zealand to work here is no longer the case. We have a governor of the Reserve Bank who calls Atiu, a small island in Cook Islands, his home. We have Mike Fiddle, who calls Rarotonga his home. We have Michael Jones, who calls Samoa his home. So there's a maturity about that I think we can actually move forward on. And in terms of our systems, we also need to relook at our systems. So the maturity of our systems is that we have DHBs now with little interference in the health sector, which I'm in, can actually contribute to the wider health systems in the Pacific across the spectrum of primary, secondary, and tertiary healthcare, and including public health. So there's that crop of thought. In the region, it's actually us responding to what the Pacific countries are and investing. We all know that it takes 5, 10, probably 20 years for most of our projects and our relationships to be embedded. And we need to respect that number. I don't want to go back over the Prime Minister's, the Deputy Prime Minister's talk this morning, but those are the issues about development. It's a 10, 20-year program from growing the capacity, the capabilities, and the investment and trust in what we actually deliver. So that's one.
Thank you very, very much for that. Karen, your thoughts?
So as a Cook Islander who lives in New Zealand, works for the Cook Islands government and works for the New Zealand government, I'm lucky enough to be in the corridor in between our countries. And it gives me an opportunity to see things that work and things that end up as car crashes. And I think one of the opportunities that the reset presents to us is the opportunity to honestly value the contribution that we each make to each other and better explore the collective contribution that we can make globally. This will take some real honest conversations between us about what works and what's crap. And so I just wanted to start by saying one of the things, here's what the reset doesn't look like. And what it doesn't look like is, number one, letting our Deputy Prime Minister come in through a side door, through the middle of a Pacific performing group with fairly leaders, and sitting him down. And this is not any reflection on any individuals involved, but this is about respect for each other, huge respect. And so, in just saying that, I am really grateful that the opportunity that Sid provides this morning to have this really honest conversation. But we're not going to get reset without a bit of grating against each other, and I think we've got to be up for that.
Thank you. Kenny.
Oh, thank you. I think I'm the only science person coming here. You know, my area is on climate, so climate change. So we base our decisions on evidence-based or scientific evidence. So I'll try and define it from a science perspective, how I see the reset. I just see as resilient development, economic development. The S is sustainability, sustainable development, environmental management, and then of course T with trade. So I sort of lump those as the reset, as I see it. And most of the issues that came out of the Deputy Prime Ministers from both the Cook Islands and New Zealand revolves around those things. And I see the need to focus on not reinventing the wheel, but build on systems that are already in place in the region. So for example, if I take the resilient development component of my reset definition, there's already a framework for Pacific resilience development already agreed at the highest level. So we don't need to try and reinvent the wheel through the reset, but rather build on that one. Likewise, in terms of trade, you know, when I see trade, I would really want from a regional perspective to be more on technological innovation, because that's the future in the climate area. You know, perhaps I can just quickly cover the climate policy arena from my perspective. There are 4 ways that we need to look at. One is on mitigation, which is decarbonization, and we all talk about renewable energy. It's great. The second one is adaptation, of course, to the impact. But 2 other policy, which is very much kind of focused on technological innovation, that hasn't been really at the top of the agenda in the region, but it's really now after the release of the special IPCC 1.5 report. It's the issue of carbon dioxide removal and solar radiation management. And that's where the world is moving in terms of technological changes that needs to happen very quickly, because we are not going to go to the 1.5 unless we went through technological solutions. So that's my brief definition.
Thank you. Thank you. Josiah?
Talofa, everyone. As you can see, Josiah's my name. I'm 23, I'm from Ōtautahi, from Christchurch. I'm a New Zealand born Samoan, so I didn't grow up in Samoa. I'm very much like the 60% of Pacific young people in New Zealand who are now born here, and 50% of us are also Māori. So there's this growing diaspora that we're hearing about of Pacific young people who are growing up who may not know their heritage very well. I think there's an opportunity to connect mental well-being and this corridor that we're hearing a little bit about here. This government relationship, this reset has to be cross-government. At the moment it's not. I think the Whanaora 6+6 partnership seems like a really neat way to look at how our government could connect, so the different agencies which work in the Pacific are connected to what's happening from the community. So that partnership has 6 iwi leaders and 6 ministers of our Crown connected. So it's not active at the moment, but I think models like that bring us to the table, because as Karen's pointed out, when our voices aren't clearly shaping the directions of our leaders, things happen that can offend our community, and the way, as we've heard from other speakers, really does matter in getting the Pacific reset to live. And so I guess for me, it's moving from the round to the whānau. And that's kind of what I see the reset is.
Let's stick with the millennials here. I mean, do they really care? You know the folks that you hang out with, then on Sundays at church.
Yeah, they do. They do. The 2017 Pacific Youth Parliament held in New Zealand said that racism was the biggest challenge to Pacific youth wellbeing in New Zealand. In the last few months, we've seen during Pacific Language Weeks, significant media organisations make a couple of videos to talk about the history, to talk about New Zealand's colonisation of Samoa, the imbalance in the relationship across the realm, and these other things. And we've seen, I think, Pacific youth wellbeing increase, because in our schools at the moment, our young people have to explain why we have scholarships for Pacific need, why we have quotas around different things. All of this, is part of this broader discussion of equity. And so, yes, I think it does matter to Pacific young people a lot.
So, Karen, you touched on it. We're going to have robust conversations throughout this journey. And as someone or many people have said, in a way we're family, where we can have those hard conversations. But the Deputy Prime Minister Winston Peters again mentions the underpinnings of democracy, human rights, gender equality, rule of law, and as he smiled, media freedoms. So in terms of those underpinnings of democracy, we're going to have some hard, difficult conversations, aren't we?
Yeah, absolutely, because some of those things we've got different views on here in New Zealand. And the Pacific Reset is an opportunity to say, it's not that this is right and this is wrong, but how do we find a way to make those things work together across the region?
And Kiki, your thoughts on that?
Well, politicians come and go, don't they? And probably crucial to that comment is that we hope that Winston's still here in 3 years. Because crucial to the whole process is maintenance of this reset program to push it forward. So then this applies even across to the Pacific countries. And I agree with Karen.
So Penny, I mean, in terms of NGOs, I mean, you find that in the climate change sector that you work in, a lot of international NGOs, but do you see good capacity or capability on the ground in some of the Pacific Island countries that you work with? And I guess the sort of second question to that is, I think it was touched on, are they able to pick up the mantle in terms of some of the work that's occurring on the ground, when in due course maybe some of the international NGOs are able to pass on the baton?
I started in 1990 at the Second World Climate Conference when we started looking at the negotiations of the UNFCCC. And interestingly, I've been seeing the huge changes in terms of the makeup of people attending the conferences. And a number of lessons can be learned from there. One is the continuity. I see over and over again in the region, you have people that were brilliant for Pacific Island countries, and then they move on to other jobs or no longer there, and then you start from scratch again. The second point is amazingly, I've seen almost triple the number of people compared to when we started back in 1990 negotiating. So you're looking at averaging of about 20,000 people attending. And what is fascinating from a scientific perspective, the number of participants increasing is directly correlate to the emissions going on ever since we work on this issue. And for me personally, as a science person doing a lot of the analysis, the Paris Agreement would have been ideal adopted between 1992 and 1995. And we took so long to be able to come up until 2015 with the Paris Agreement. So your specific question on the NGO, did they do their job okay? And did they manage to? I'm not sure about that. Because there's a whole lot of activities going on outside of the side event. It's great publicity. But in reality, we need the action. The atmosphere doesn't recognize whether it's my emissions from Wellington or somebody's emissions out of a car in Tuvalu or even in Rarotonga. They just see the CO2 emissions per se. So we're already way over what we need to do. And we're now looking into desperation in terms of what we need to do. And that's why we're looking into this carbon dioxide removal and solar radiation management technologically. And we need to do the research work. One interesting, if you follow the Bill Gates notes, it's brilliant. He put out a really good article just 2 days ago. And he argued about, if you just look at the methane issue and the cattle. As a country, the first country will be the US in terms of methane emission. The second, China. The second is the US. Guess who's third? Cattle country. And if you don't deal with the methane globally as well, and then the fourth is India. So that's a huge challenge for not just New Zealand, given our very reliant on our the dairy industry, but also globally. And these are the issues that we cannot just leave it aside. The other issue that needs to be addressed, for example, is the bunker fuel issue. Emissions from shipping and aviation. So whatever we can do on the ground in terms of electricity, it's not going to solve the global problem because it's only 25% of global emissions, and we have a 75% problem that we need to solve.
So, Karen, given you that you work for two governments at this stage, let us know when you work for a third. The Minister Peters, put I think a bit of a challenge in regards to this room around collaboration, partnership, and cooperation. But as we all know, there's more than 30 government departments and New Zealand Crown entities operating in the Pacific, and sometimes they don't swim in their own swim lanes, nor do they know which direction. While some are doing backstroke and others are doing freestyle. Karen, given your you work within that corridor between two countries, is that a frustration for you in terms of governments giving up that challenge to civil society, but yet they also have that difficulty as well?
A frustration, but also an opportunity, I think, and an opportunity which I hope the Reset agenda helps to address honestly. But for me, the fundamental point about all of this, and DPM Peters mentioned this, as did DPM Brown, the fundamental issue to this is the opportunities that we take while we're in that corridor to have dialogue together. And, the Pacific Reset is going to take a co-design process of us all being in the room. NGOs, Pacific countries, New Zealand, everybody who's interested, but being there for honest reasons too.
That co-design word's been overused,
Yes,
I think.
sorry.
Yeah. So, are you able to give us an example? Because I think Mark gave us a good example in terms of the super go back home. But are there specific examples that you're thinking of in terms of an initiative or low-hanging fruit in terms of co-design?
Yeah. Well, just a small one. If I think our situation in the Cook Islands, one of the reasons I'm even there is to help provide some support around developing our governance capabilities. So that's my gig back here in New Zealand. Minister Brown approached me about being able to bring those skills to the cooks, but not just bring them, share them, transfer them, leave them there and come home. And I think the more initiatives that we can have like that, and again this is where NGOs can play quite a big role in both identifying people and identifying opportunities. So there are small things, there are big things, but it's about all of us being honest and clear that they're up for the reset, that it's going to mean good things for everybody who's involved, and that we're all prepared to put the energy into making it work for the whole region.
If I can just add to that, I would think in this room and this audience that if you have been delivering services through a program of some sort for the last 20 years and you're still doing the same thing and haven't built capacity in the countries to take over, to run the business, then you need to rethink what you're doing. Rethink what you're doing. One of the things that I do want to say is that the difficulty we have in New Zealand is that we have a system where we have, as I said, we have a very mature system across our sectors, but the delivery through that is through one agency, which is IMPACT. That alone in itself is an impediment of the ways we do things. Now, that's just the way it runs at the moment. Right? That's just my view about this. But there are easier ways to have our whole of New Zealand actually deliver into the Pacific. And IMPACT got to work out how to make it easier for themselves, because it's actually a big burden on them, and how to make it easier on all of us here who actually want to be part of that process.
Penny, did you want to add to that?
Yeah, I completely agree. I'm wearing my hat now as a climate advisor to Tokelau. And there's absolutely, in my view, no way that should be lumped together under the realm Tokelau together with Niue and the Cook Islands. And we heard this morning that the Cook Islands ODA graduation, and yet Tokelau has the lowest GDP per capita. And when I first went to Tokelau, I didn't realize it takes 26 hours minimum out of Apia on the boat to get to the first island. And then coming from Atafu to the north, to the west, sorry, back to Apia is minimum of 40 hours. And we don't have an airport in Tokelau. And I just cannot understand why we have neglected Tokelau, in my view, as New Zealanders and a taxpayer, as a taxpayer as well. And I think Tokelau needs special attention under the reset agenda, in my view.
Thank you for that. Josiah, did you want to add anything to that?
No, except that I completely agree. You know, like every young person in New Zealand, every person in New Zealand should know what our realm is, should know who our whānau is. We know who our immediate whānau is. We need to know who that is on a country level. And we need to live in a way that honours that what we do here affects our citizens who are in other parts of the region.
So let me stay with you, Josiah. Winston Peters, in his Laui speech at the beginning of the year, said that he acknowledged that the young Pacific leaders coming through in our homelands are becoming increasingly confident, independent, and assertive. I guess with 320,000 New Zealanders of Pacific Island descent, I think you can use that phrase to describe the next generation coming through, particularly when 37% of New Zealanders are under the age of 20. So, I mean, do you believe that the millennials or I count myself as Gen X, so please count me in on this one. Are they becoming increasingly confident, and independent, and assertive within the context of New Zealand society?
I think in New Zealand and in the Pacific, it's a mix. Pacific young people don't often get the opportunity to practice decision making, and that's more so true outside of New Zealand and Australia. And that's an opportunity, I think, for your organisations, and where possible to share power with the communities you're working about, what he's talking about. But yeah, practicing decision making is where you actually, it's more than co-design. You know, in the work we do in Christchurch, we're a trust made up of 13 young people, all under 24. Pretty much when you're in 30, by the time you're 30, you're one of our mentors or you leave. We have two 30-year-olds on our board. We can govern ourselves. We work nationally. We do a little bit of international stuff. You know, we have the innovation and the capability. At times we just don't have people who are willing to open the doors. And so, yeah, I put that to you all. How are you doing that? And one thing that might help, an Pacific Health organisation here called Levada, which I'm on the board of, they've got this co-decision making framework which looks at how ready is your organisation to work with Pacific young people. I think it's pretty translatable to how you work with Pacific people. And so it looks at radical acceptance, absolute inclusion, and full participation as things which Pacific young people say would make the difference in what we need. And absolute inclusion and radical acceptance are quite challenging for how we might look at engagement with people. You know, we say we're happy to meet you if you come to this event at 5 p.m. All these other things, but actually it's about working outside of 9 to 5. It's about being flexible in ways that will actually hurt us, and it will cost us to do Pacific engagement in a way that's actually Pacific and not Pacific when it suits us.
Thank you, Karen.
And Josiah's description of how they work at Pilot, which is a really successful organisation, I guess just underpins the importance of, again, an opportunity I think the Reset presents, which is valuing the Pacific cultural capital, that we think about 320,000 in New Zealand, let alone the rest in the region, can bring to the Reset and can bring to the definitions of what success looks like for the region. So while we've got some great examples here in New Zealand, again, we don't pretend to have all the answers. Out there in the region, they do too. So again, a great opportunity for NGOs working in the region to be asking some honest questions about how well we understand the drivers, how well you utilise the Pacific cultural capital that's been placed in front of you.
So I think it was the gentleman from Oxfam mentioned this, and I think both Deputy Prime Ministers mentioned the narrative around the Pacific Reset, particularly amongst the New Zealand taxpayer. I guess a few days ago, I think there was a beautiful scene where they dug the hole for recognition of those who of Pacific Island descent, particularly from the realm countries who fought during the war and to earn their citizenship. But of course, as Deputy Prime Minister Mark Brown noted, sometimes dehumanising and comments that are hurtful made utilising and leveraging positions or platforms can be made. So I mean, yes, I can be honest. I mean, are you guys elite? Or are you productive members of New Zealand society? So I'll leave that with you. Karen?
Go. We're not talking about the L word.
Yeah.
Look, one of the fabulous things about being a Canterbury-born, proud Cook Islander with the ability to move freely between New Zealand and certainly the Cook Islands but around the region is the ability to contribute everything that we have culturally to the good of the region. And again, this is one of the things for me about the reset, right? This is an opportunity for us to think more clearly and honestly about us as a region and not just us as individual countries. And I'm fortunate to have parents who came from the realm country because that afforded me this, what I think is a luxury, to be able to move quite freely and contribute to the good of our people wherever they happen to be.
Thank you.
Yeah, I can say, for the academics in the room, particularly the social scientists working, I strongly recommend re-looking at how you frame looking into the Pacific. So for example, when I was the lead author for the IPCC fourth assessment report in 2007, we were told to use the name Small Island Developing States, and then the politics kick in and it becomes Small Island States, and then the politics kick in Small Islands. And then we tried to define a small island based on geographical location, and we were told not to because politically it's not going to be accepted. So we stick to small islands for our chapter. But what I'm saying is what I've seen is that same narrative going right across today. But I will reframe it as like big ocean states, box, and that's much more powerful than framing the thing. And that's the reality that we'll have to face as we move forward. So that's why we have some of the most powerful countries already in the region. I was in a meeting in Tonga 2 weeks ago, and the Russians are in the Pacific, whether we like it or not. And that's the reality that we need to look into. Like, there's a lot of engagement of non-traditional partners that is now in the region.
Kitty, in terms of the narrative amongst our Pacific diaspora here in New Zealand around this Pacific reset, I guess it's a similar question that I asked Josiah before. Do they know what the Pacific reset is? Do they care, given the deprivation that they are going through, given the deficit that our Pacific communities here suffer? Yeah, same question to you. Do our cohort, or do our diaspora here in New Zealand care about something that's politics to them?
Well, that's our age group, isn't it, Peter?
Yeah.
So we still are pretty closely attached to the Pacific, and most of us have still families there and family here. The whole issue with wanting to lift the game in terms of the diaspora is about working closely, what Karen said before, it's about working closely with teams out there. I just reflect on what we looked at in the health field. Some years ago we started training, particularly in the specialty world, surgeons, anesthetists, pediatricians with National University. And 20 years later, our leadership approach to the health sector is now seeing health ministers develop out of these people that we're training, out of our colleagues, out of our students. And that's the level of attention that I want us to think about in terms of how we deal with it. Now, to do that, you do need support for the diaspora from New Zealand and Australia. Coming back to the comment about a leech, actually I am a leech, yes, I totally agree with that. So born in an island about the distance from Rome, as Mark mentioned, it's about 700 miles north of the main island. I came to New Zealand with a view that I was going to mobilise the New Zealand sectors, particularly the health sector, to deliver into the Cook Islands. In the last 20 years, we've actually leached onto more other things, so I actually delivered and mobilised a lot of the health sector, and again, I hope you won't tell me but mobilised the whole of the health sector to deliver into the region. So we have programs inclusive with Australia and the DFAT arrangements that actually delivers across the whole region, and we can make this even better. So the diaspora is out there ready to go. There are other people who are non-Pacific, like yourselves, like us, like others, who are so willing to help. The willingness in the region, both Australia and New Zealand, and in the region to work together is there. I think we're just going to come back a wee bit and reset a lot of the mechanisms that we need to make it work. And then philosophically, that will reset what we actually go forward.
Thank you. I just saw you probably have a lot to say on that comment, given that we've had this conversation privately.
Yeah. I think, so for example, there's a young woman called Elizabeth Kitea who lives in Australia, but she's Australian Tongan. And at the moment she's running Tongan Women in Parliament, and she met the royal family when they were there a couple of weeks ago. But the point I want to make around that is she's living in both worlds. She's able to help contribute to something where it's not always safe for women to have this important safe discussion, but because she is Tongan, because she lives in both worlds, she's able to open up that space which is safe for other young people. And so it's using us as sort of Pacific youth ambassadors, I think, who can walk the corridor, who can culturally explain the differences in a way that's safe. Because there can be a naivety about us who are New Zealand born or Australian born, and you know, we can walk in there similar to others who don't have the experience. But you know, coupled with our matua, and you know, that's us together as one unit. We bring all of us together as opposed to just parts of us. So yeah, Kiki, Karen, Peter, you know, all of us.
Karen, in terms of, it's a phrase that both Deputy Prime Ministers use, the traditional donor partners and the new players. I mean, I'll just put it out there. I mean, the Russians are there, the Chinese are in the Pacific, notwithstanding the Chinese have been in the Pacific for hundreds of years. But their government and the donor machinery is there. I mean, do we now have this so-called Pacific region identity? I mean, we find it difficult to sort of find those core values, if that's the word, or what makes us the Pacific region that collectively also includes the so-called new donor partners, which are actually not new?
I think that's the point, they're not new. I mean, the fundamental things that draw us together as a region are things that actually we don't tend to talk about a lot publicly, which is about our long-time cultural connections, our proximity being down the bottom of the world. Really, and I think when Deputy Prime Minister Peters, he talked earlier on about the importance of talking about the reset. I think part of that is reminding people, and this is both here in New Zealand and in the region, about what we do mean to each other, what have been our very many connections over time in very many fields, what has been the value of that relationship. And interesting thinking about the realm countries, because in my mind that's where you start, because we talk about this being a special relationship, but what's special about it? What is special to the average New Zealander? What is special to the average Tongan living in Tonga? We kind of put those things out there, but we don't put much shape around. And again, I'm hoping that the Pacific Reset agenda helps to get some clarity around things like that for all of us. Just want to pick up the point that Kiki made too about who's here in the reset, because yeah, it's not just the Ministry of Foreign Affairs' responsibility to make this reset happen. While they might be the diplomatic mechanism, certainly, you know, supporting Deputy Prime Minister Peters, this does have to be a whole of government and a whole of society approach. Which is why it's great to have you guys in the room today as the, you're still civil, very civil society. Thinking of, and one of my challenges, I guess, to you as a sector is thinking about collectively, how are you going to approach the reset?
One of the things that keeps coming out is the 700 and how many million over 4 years, and the extra 180 and an extra so and so. The money doesn't actually matter. Does matter, doesn't it? But the money is not the issue. Within the maturity that I mentioned within the New Zealand system, mobilisation of a lot of our activities would cost very little money. Very little money. But we focus too much on the money. Get the philosophy right, get our systems right, make it simpler, and be friendly, we should be okay. But it's actually not about the money.
Thank you. Penny?
Just added on to what he just said, we have to bear in mind that one size fits all approach is not going to work. It's very different for Tuvalu or Kiribati or Cook Islands or Samoa. So we cannot assume the uniformity in terms of like have a one approach when we're doing things. It's very different.
And it's, again, it's interesting, DP Mark Brown mentioned that greater integration was naturally occurring across the Pacific Island countries, that the Cook Islands had undertaken their Pacific reset 10 plus years ago. Tell us a little bit about the Cook Islands Pacific reset, Kiki or Karen, if there's anything more to add to what Mark Brown mentioned.
Probably the reset happened in 1996 with the social sector reforms. That actually was quite detrimental to the Canada to do that. They looked at how the system could cope by streamline and making people redundant. You know, the government in these small countries are social welfare systems in a way. So they streamlined it, and of course all the good people left, and there's an exodus from the country. So we learned from that. And then following that, we got hit by several quite big cyclones. And so this is mitigating the risk around people exodus, around depopulation, around external influences. So the government's been starting to then look at putting it away for a rainy day. And that's when August actually started. And that was about over 15 years ago that this has happened. But this has just come to the fore a bit more in the last 10 years. And these are the debates and discussions about where we're heading off to. The minerals underneath the Cook Islands is a significant amount of, gold for the future. There's trillions and trillions and trillions of dollars, but a quarter of the world's magnesium is underneath our ocean. That has potential to do a whole lot of things, including damage to climate. But that's another discussion. So the evolution of that is happening, and it's also because the relationship with New Zealand, to have a very smart Deputy Prime Minister from the Cook Islands and proud to be part of, to stand here and deliver what he thinks is the future of the Cook Islands is actually a product of all of us here. This is a product of our education system, a product of our health system, and a product of our support for the Cook Islands. So even though we talk about not doing too much, we should pat ourselves on the back now and again and actually acknowledge these sort of things.
But if I could just add too, I guess one of the indications of the reset from Cook Islands' point of view is that you heard Minister Brown talk this morning about the global population of Cook Islanders, around about 100,000 of us around the world. And that's a complete change in the conversations we were having not so long ago, talking about the depopulation. And while that's still an issue, actually we're starting to take a different tack around saying what is actually possible with what we've got, rather than thinking about what we don't have.
Peter, you wanted to add?
Yeah. You know, I see in 1987, I was worked part-time for the former New Zealand Meteorological Service doing weather observation back in Āhia Observatory. And I didn't realize at that time the rogenomics is going to have a huge impact on Pacific Island countries that rely on New Zealand, you know, like Cook Islands, Samoa, Niue, Korkala, and so forth, and Tonga. And in my area, for example, all of a sudden in 1988, we were asked, the former New Zealand Met Service is going to be withdrawn from all Pacific Island countries. You're on your own. And all of a sudden, I was faced as a young guy who was put out there to try and how we're going to nationalize the meteorological service in Samoa. It's a huge task. And as a young person, all of a sudden you're faced with like, do we continue to do the upper air observation in Mulunulu, which is averaging about $1,200 per flight in order to get the flights, the upper air flights for aviation purposes. There's no way that Samoa at the time will afford one flight per day at that price for 365 days a year. So I had to innovate and think of some ideas, and I contacted my colleagues at NOAA, you know, the US, across the board with American Samoa. They're close by to us, and they say, you guys continue the observation, and we will just piggyback on you guys. And that's how we did it. To this day, we don't have observations there in Samoa, in the upper air. We rely on American Samoa. But my point there was that I didn't realize the Rogernomics and the corporatization and privatization of government ministries here led to a huge gap in the region. And I still remember in 1997 when we had a meteorological meeting in Apia, there was a presentation from New Zealand about privatization of National Meteorological Service. And I said, Niue only got 2 people in the Met Service, and you're saying privatize? and these are the sort of things that for me personally, for the reset, we need to learn from this and make sure that we're not going to go and try and impose our values and how we think the world should be in our communities. And you know, that's how I feel, and I hope that this, I'm very excited. I fully support the Pacific Reset. I think we're doing it in the right way this time around.
And of course, the Pacific region, people forget that it's, as Mr. Peters rightly points out, it's 22 million people, 16 countries and territories. So it also includes, it is Micronesia, Melanesia and Polynesia. So in terms of, I mean, it's not actually reflective of the Pacific region when you've got 2 Samoans and 2 Cook Islanders up here and a Samoan facilitating. So we're going to get that right next time. But next, and the Tongan, I don't know if he's Tongan yet, so trying to figure it out. He's from Timaru. So in terms of Micronesia and Melanesia, thoughts on again, given your experiences within the diaspora here, but also your experience with the likes of, you know, I know with Kiribati and also PNG, you know, any thoughts on the narrative within those communities and whether they need greater work in terms of understanding Pacific Reset or not, maybe?
So if we reflect back in the last sort of 10, 15 years about the Pacific family, the Pacific family isn't as tight as they used to be. So a good example of this is recent and not too long ago, about 8 years or 10 years ago, is the push for a Pacific candidate for the regional director of WHO, the Western Pacific region. Now, probably the last bastion of connectedness in the world to come together and vote and support their candidate from Tonga. Completely lost it. Got sidetracked, disjointed, and the Pacific family at that time, since then, has stayed pretty much apart. And we had another go, Jonathan and the team, from New Zealand side, just recently, and we lost again. Again, where's the Pacific family? So that's not to say that's a bad thing. That's actually for us to reset our thinking about the Pacific. We now have we have had for some time now the Melanesian spearhead, as you referred to there, the group who are very strong and have the biggest population representation in the region, have the biggest you know, movement and support. And then we have the Polynesian, which busts along, wrong word, and Micronesia. So the understanding about what's happening in the region needs us to rethink about it. Japan's been there for years. Taiwan looks after 5 countries in the north who affiliate with them. New Zealand, Australia has their role. China has been there for some time, but with changes in their system. So for us, it's actually saying, how do we reset the thinking to currency at the moment to make it move forward? Not actually change a whole lot, because we can't change a whole lot. It's up to also to the countries to determine what they want.
Excellent. Thank you, Kiki. I've run out of questions, so it's your turn. We do have a roaming mic. No, we don't? Yes, we do. And so there's a question over here.
So I'll say who am I? Statement and a question. I was born in Kenya. I've lived in 5 developing countries. I've worked in 30 developing countries, and I've lived and travelled in a further 70 countries. So I have white privilege, born in the UK, but I've actually lived most of my life outside of the UK, 6 years in Aotearoa. The statement is, and like Pene Huro, I was in Kyoto and Buenos Aires in the climate change talks. A statement, the change, how will we reset our thinking? And I assert that we need to go further than changing the mechanisms. We need to look at our worldviews, because the current world is by a Cartesian worldview, which has crises and environment, pollution, seas, air. Everywhere you look, we create unstable systems. And you look at the social status among people. People are consuming more and more and more, but they're unhappy, frustrated. Their well-being is not great. On the other hand, there's that Cartesian worldview has been the dominant worldview in the world for the last 500 years. The alternative worldview, which is, if you like, acknowledged by Te Ao Māori, America, the interconnected worldview of Kaitiaki, which is now supported by quantum physics, produces stable systems which are resilient and earth-honoring. And the challenge we have is I'm going to be controversial here.
Can you be controversial with a question?
I'm coming to it, thank you. The church has some responsibility in dumbing down indigenous wisdom. Across the Pacific, the indigenous technical knowledge.
Excuse me, I think you need to answer your question. You've got 4 Pacific people in front of you, and you're talking about these worldviews that have nothing to do with it. What is your question?
My question is, thank you, I appreciate it. My question is, are you having conversations about bringing together the 2 worldviews?
Thank you. So, Penny, to start with you.
Well, I can only talk about my own work, and one of the papers I did research when I was working for NIWA is looking at traditional knowledge within climate forecasting in Samoa, so that I can learn about how that versus the Western knowledge of forecasting. And I got into a lot of problems with social sciences, and I don't understand why I was trying to quantify things from a traditional knowledge system versus the Western knowledge system. But what was fascinating for me, learning about how perhaps the way that you frame it, in terms of my brain was colonized as a Western thinking in terms of the evidence-based rather than go beyond just the measurable, quantifiable stuff. And that is a huge lesson for me that I learned. So it's happening, but I think it needs much more, and it needs the engagement of community.
Thank you. Any other question, Robin, Mike? Back there. Question, Danielle.
Well, I think the key thing is finding people who aren't in the political cycle. So we all work outside of the political cycle, which is how our Pacific community operates. We know who does what when, and we lead, when we need to, and we follow when we need to as well. So I would just say that our kind of model is probably would work.
Anyone else?
I think the current way the millennials work actually should be encouraged. And it's actually getting a sort of like a structure to their career plan. If you want to be involved in this type of work, helping people, then that long-term view still comes in, because you should be encouraged to go overseas, you should be encouraged to do other things, you should be encouraged to change jobs, you shouldn't do anything different. That's just the life cycle. But inherent in that life cycle is the philosophies that are instilled into you about what is actually important.
And I think it's that considering of what's important that keeps the long-term nature. So short-term stints in the context of a long-term plan and being able to value long-term relationships.
The point that he raises about looking at our planet is very small. From a science perspective, we're moving to Earth system science from looking at the planet as a whole. So we need to be able to also factor that in when we're dealing with regional and multilateral systems. So, for example, I've seen so many beautiful, really brilliantly written plans in the region. For example, the Pacific Plan, and then the UN will come up with the NDG, and then the new plan change, and then the SDG, the new plan change. But it's the same issue, but reworded differently, in my view. Maybe I'm wrong. But the reality is it has to work both ways to be able to keep that continuity so that people like myself will go and still have the continuity of building on what the foundation is already there rather than reinventing the wheel.
Thank you. Question up the back.
It's a really relevant question as to what are the research set conversations looking like in those particular patches and actually how connected are they. I don't know the answer to it, but I would say that a fundamental part of the reset is for those particular forums that have already got together to be thinking about what it looks like for them.
Well, it's interesting you raised that point because that's exactly what happened with the establishment of the Pacific Island Development Forum by Fiji. And it's operating not just as intergovernmental, but also allowing non-governmental organizations to be part of it. And I've been fortunate to go to some of their meetings. Tokelau is a member of the idea. And it's fascinating. It's a bit like this conversation. You have governments and non-government in the same room trying to agree on things. And the region is so complicated now compared to what we used to, and we have to think beyond the traditional forum island countries sort of.
Here's a question down here. Yep, please. Sorry.
Darren Ward from Direct Impact Group. There's a meeting going on in Samoa at the moment about the Samoa. And just this morning, Italy, Ireland made comments about how important it is that they support for development of small islands. What do you think in that context of two-part question? What do you see as the unique role developing a global reach for development in the Pacific, and what framework does that fit in? That discussion in the most.
We also know that the United Kingdom is going to be opening an embassy, High Commission, in Samoa shortly, and that Samoa's put up a bid for Chogan for the Common Piece of Government. So, yeah, there is a lot of European interest in the Pacific. I think one thing that New Zealand and Australia and others who are here can really emphasise is an abundance mindset. One of my favourite YouTube videos, if you're looking for a good TEDx talk. It kind of, and this is where you take Pacific Indigenous understandings and New Zealand starts to live them. It's where we look at sometimes, the smell of the oily rag thing is the reality, and again, what Minister Peers was saying is, not talking about the deficit of the Pacific, and valuing what is the strengths that are here. And I think, getting that bit out of the way will make the relationship a lot easier if it's less paternalistic from the start.
Yeah, I think we've got to stop worrying about the influences of Europe or other countries around the site and trading into it as our historical partners. The Samoa meeting would be quite good actually to get people around the table and say, what are you actually about? Where's the offer on the table? Let's discuss this. What are the long-term implications? So I think that's a back against the wall type of thing. If we do go in there and people are offering to help, see what the long-term implications are. How's the political influences happening? We all know there's politics around the Pacific. And New Zealand, which is about New Zealand now, New Zealand then needs to look at how to be effective in that environment. So I think hold the first past the post into that place.
Yeah, it's nothing new. I mean, going back to my own work, the Italians were helping us, you name it, the Canadians and everybody else. So my own approach to that is like we leave it up to the countries themselves to make up their own mind. And that's the way it should be as members. The Pacific have a long history with the EU. I'm excited about the Pacific Reset because countries and blocs like the EU look at New Zealand as a genuine, honest broker that will help, guide their programs in the region. And to me, that's a strength for us here in New Zealand.
Oh, so we'll go down here to Peter.
Oh, sorry. Can I come back to the money for the moment? Because poor old MFAT has to spend $740 million on time. Public sector rules. But you said something else very interesting. You said that it shouldn't all be going through MFAT. So couldn't you elaborate?
Well, we know that MFAT is our conduit as a risk mitigating for the country in terms of aid and process that's been set up, and that's where we're going to work. But I think with loosening of the reins, the health could actually affiliate more with the health of the region, more directly. We have institutional relationships that are between Samoa and Tangis Manukau, and there's some others through other processes. And those could actually be made easier because you actually have people who know what they're doing and how, and who actually can reduce the risks as long as somebody there to support the process. So we don't necessarily have to go through all the process through MFAT, but MFAT needs to provide that governing or that process overview to make sure that politically, obviously, that it's safe for us. So that's what I'm saying. There's a significant number of intellectual property that we have in New Zealand that we actually share with the world freely, but we can actually share that a bit more with the Pacific.
I think there was one more question down the back, and we'll take the last one. So.
I'm partly just wanting to speak on behalf of one of our absent panel members, Tracy Haupapa, who's the chair of FOMA, who would have loved to have been here today but has family responsibilities. And if she was sitting here, one of the things that she would say to you, and this is partly off the back of a conversation between FOMA and the Cook Islands government during the joint ministerial forum earlier in the year, that the reset certainly provides an opportunity to celebrate some of the cultural heritage connections that we've long had, but work out what does that look like in 2018 going forward, and what do we each bring to the party. So I think some of us looking back to the cultural connections, as she would say, not on behalf of Māori, and certainly sitting in that conversation as a Cook Island Māori, it was a real revelation to think, here are long-term relationships that we've always had, always valued, but have just not really activated in modern times. And what could that look like? And to be honest, it's probably the generation more sitting at that end of the panel that should be having a say around how that looks.
Thank you.
On that, so this year I've been on the mental health inquiry, and one of the people who supported us in our job was Koromiko Richards, Whai Koromiko Richards. She's a mental health kuia up with Te Raumatatini. And she said that Pacific people in New Zealand need a marae. She said iwi and hapu whānau should set aside land for Pacific to have a marae, to have the same sort of sense of belonging, a tūranga waiwai here in Aotearoa, because we can't, and we aren't all born in islands anymore. So that's one perspective. I think there's also the perspective of the birth thing. You know, more than 50% of Pacific young people being born now, Pacific children, are also Māori. So there needs to be some connecting up. And I know the Ministry of Pacific Peoples in New Zealand and TPK are looking at some sort of formal relationship. So yeah, but there's lots of different spaces to think about. I mean, I wouldn't mind more Pacific marae.
Penny, I'll leave the last comment to you.
Yeah, one issue that I really want to see and touch about, and that directly ties to the climate change.
Well, there's a topic, thanks Penny, for the next CID conference, security and how it fits under the new Pacific Reset, or by that time it won't be new, hopefully. Anyway, that is the panel discussion. Look, I was asked to summarise, but I can't, because there were some great comments there, but I would say this: what you have in front of you are four great leaders who are reflective of that corridor and that connection back to their homelands. Some of them were born in their homelands and now going back and working for their homelands, but at the same time highly productive New Zealand citizens who continue to serve our communities, whether you're Polynesian, Pacific or not, within our country. So they are reflective of the connections that we have between New Zealand and the Pacific region. So let's give them a hand.
Listen, a token of our appreciation, and thank you so much to my friends and whānau for making huge efforts.
Chardonnay.
Yes,
Thanks so much to our panel. There was some great paneling, guys. Great paneling. Great work, everybody. Yeah, it really was. I really enjoyed that. Thank you so much. Let's all give them another round of applause, please.